Well, Stanley, you know, I've done lots of conversations in my time, and the great dilemma is knowing where to look. If you look at the audience, it looks like you're ignoring your conversationalists, and if you look at the conversationalists, it looks like you're ignoring the audience. So it was a very simple answer, is look at the art. And that solves it. But quite seriously, I knew of your work before you had this show, but I have to be honest in saying that I'd never seen it in the flesh. And I can never predict my gut reactions, which I have to most art, and sometimes I just can't bear it. I won't name names, but as an artist, I just went into a show on the off chance, and I thought, oh God, this is awful. And then there's some which are sort of, you know, okay, but in all honesty, when I came here and saw it last week, I really liked it.
Thank you.
And if I didn't, I'd tell you, I probably wouldn't be doing this conversation. But I'm not sure why I liked it, but it's a kind of instant reaction you get. And it's not meant to be 40 questions or anything like that. It's meant to be a conversation, you know. But does the title, Full Circle, have any particular significance?
So it does. And first let me say what an honor it is to be speaking with you, David. And
it's too late for flattery.
No, but it really is
no, thank you.
The absolute truth. And to be showing here at Gazelli Art House, I'm really honored and touched. Full Circle sort of leads into the idea of how things go around and come around. And specifically to this show, how things that I invented 20, 30, 15, 5 years ago are reemerging in my work.
Right.
And it's not a conscious thing that happens. It's just simply things start popping up. And but each time something that I've worked previously comes up, I'm always interested in making it new. For the simple idea that I'm not interested in what I've done, I'm not interested in what we know, I'm interested in what I don't know and what we don't know collectively.
So does this work, shown here now, does it mark a break with what went on before, or is it a continuation?
No, it's a break. It's a break. However, there are, again, some crazy connections to my past. Like this painting behind us has its roots, if I really had to dig it out, in my ceramics practice in 1982 at Pitzer College, where I was making plaster molds of objects to do slip casting, but instead of pouring a single color into a mold, I was taking multiple different colors of slip, putting them into cups or buckets, and throwing them at the mold. And the result, though, is you capture the energy, you capture the explosion, you capture what hits the plaster.
So, but just to interject a bit, did that come out of action painting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And where I started drinking the Kool-Aid was looking at Jackson Pollock.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Because
that's what made sense to me early on, and that's what sucked me in. And just quickly, I had looked at Pollock in books, but the first time I stood in front of one was at MoMA, seeing his large piece 131, and it was a riveting experience where I didn't move for 20 minutes. Color, line, and form was transportive. I went elsewhere, and that idea resonated in me that color, line, and form could take someone on a journey, could change consciousness for some number of moments.
And, you know, Pollock had that same idea because in that film of him painting in 1950 by Hans Nemeth, you know, there's a voiceover where, he's sort of saying, and he said it before, actually, in a printed statement, that when he was in his painting, it was an easy give and take.
Right.
And it was only when he lost touch with the painting, and he said it himself, as a result was a mess. But even though it's a kind of romantic idea, the notion of flinging, controlling, to some extent,
Sure.
paint, pigment, you do and you don't know where it's going to take you.
Allowing accident to guide the way, this give and take of, for those of you that don't know, every painting in this show, every drop of paint went on from the back side of the screen being pushed in this direction. The work is on sawhorses. Everything like this painting was stretched in a device like what's behind you. It's face down towards the ground, about 30 inches off the ground. If I need, I have a device called a bridge where I can get over any painting into the center of it. But I'm pushing pigment through the screen. I'm throwing paint. I'm pushing it. I go underneath the painting. I look. I don't really know. Yes, going underneath and looking is fine. You do get information, but I'm looking at it in shadow. So it's hard to really...
How much do you take a peek round the back, as it were?
So it depends. It can be, every 5 minutes. It can be once in an hour. The more I make the work, the more I have a pretty good idea of what's going to occur. Right. But what you don't know, here's, for instance, this right here. This was dropping 4, I call them blobs. This was black and white in a bucket that just allowing a drip to fall and hit. And when I moved that mass of paint, what I don't know is here's white, here's black. I have no idea how things are going to overlap or end up. And when it's all turned over, if that's fabulous, so be it. And if it's not, I won't look to affect it and change it. I will look to find a section of the painting to cut out and take away and throw the rest out.
So you change nothing from the front?
No. And because, not to cut you off, I apologize,
No.
but there's not a single brush stroke in this painting. And if you come and you look up at it, there's a certain purity to the surface, edge to edge, corner to corner. And if I were to take a brush, it would leave a different mark.
Now, when you told me that they were painted from the back,
yes.
I mean, I'll be honest with you, I never guessed that.
Sure.
At face value, my first encounter with the paintings. It's a very interesting idea because what we're looking at is almost a trace of what you do and don't see. It's almost like through the looking glass effect in a way. And then I was very compelled by this idea that the rectos, as we call them, the front, are actually the result of reversos. It's a total inversion of the whole idea of painting because recto's the front and back's back. And
right.
Unless something goes terribly wrong, you never see the backs,
Right.
Although I actually have to have an aside here, and it's not relevant to your art, but when I was doing the Rothko catalogue raisonné and saw 800 Rothko's paintings.
Oh, you lucky soul.
Yeah, up to the first 600. But I always used to say to collectors and museums, I'm not interested in the front. I want to see the back. Because all the evidence was on the back. Inscriptions, dates, labels. And now this is where it does become a bit relevant, soaking through. Because in certain paintings, you could tell from the soaking through on the back where Rothko had begun the rectangles. And he often defined them negatively, so that there would be like an outline of a rectangle, and he's
Sure.
painted around it, It's quite interesting. The whole point about painting from the back is that it makes process one of the subjects of your art. It's not just laid on. I mean, that's relatively facile. This is squeegeed through, isn't it?
It's squeegeed through, and I like to think that I guide process guides me. And with each and every painting, I discover something new. And again, sometimes it's a train wreck and a horror story, and sometimes it's like, wow, that's amazing. Yeah. And then I try to figure out exactly how did it happen? How can I control that? How can I manipulate that and still make it feel like it's organic? Because that's finding a balance between organic and contrived, to me, is something that can be, if you get it right, it can be really powerful. Inherently everything that a human being does is contrived. Mm-hmm. But to have something feel organic, I hope that there's that success in this painting, for instance, where there's this organic explosion going on that's contrasted by these elements that yet it all just sort of works.
Yeah, I get it. So in a way, there's this element of risk.
Yeah, I fail a lot.
You're not quite sure how it's going to come out on the front, as it were.
No, not until it is stood up.
And what's interesting is, I think you should maybe tell, you sort of told me once, but I think you should tell people here, how the verticals are created, the vinyl.
Okay, so I'm using adhesive-backed vinyl, which is essentially tape. I have a machine called a plotter that will cut any shape that I put into Adobe Illustrator. So there's no limitations. It can be from tiny little circles to lettering, anything. In the case of this painting, the pink rectangle started out as a piece of vinyl covering the interior of the rectangle and a piece of vinyl covering the exterior of the rectangle. The screen was completely open. Once those pieces were put on, the pink was filled in quite simply, squeegeeing the paint around from the back. Once that was dry, the vinyl was taken away. The green band was made in the exact same format, where two pieces of vinyl, screen in the center is open. The green is actually the same shade of green. Where it's darker, it's thicker. Where it's lighter, it's thinner. And there's white behind it, which happens to be what's giving it the sense of sort of glow. But that's how those elements go on. So in any of these paintings, in the painting to your left, vinyl stayed on throughout the process of making that painting, both what's covering the surround as well as the bands. And at the very end, that vinyl was taken off. And, that's the result. The piece behind you over there, again, in the Adobe Illustrator file, these thin little lines, my plotter cut it, the vinyl was put onto the back of the screen. Those openings filled in with yellow paint. There's actually a few different colors of yellow. Once that's dry, vinyl taken away. Then from the back side, the more, non-objective abex like this.
What's quite deceptive, and I didn't realize it at first, and I looked closer even when you told me, is that they're painted on two films of silkscreen. And at first glance from outside, I almost thought that the supports were so rigid. It was done on panel or something like that. But silkscreen is very flimsy.
So silkscreen, if it's not stretched, is like any fabric. It's it's a bit more rigid maybe than cotton or silk. Yeah. But it's.
And I think the other thing people might not realize are these box beam frames, which they give it a very, it's not clunky, but it's slightly industrial.
They're absolutely industrial, and again, they're used in the silkscreen printing industry for large format printing. And one of these was sitting against the wall, and a friend at Mana, Igalo Zeri, walked in my studio, and he was like, "That's fabulous. You should just leave it in the frame." And I thought, but it feels so clunky. And it took a number of weeks to realize if I put this on the wall and suspend it out in front of the wall, suddenly this big heavy thing now has this tension and freedom, and it's floating, along with the idea of the second layer of screen behind the first, which is causing the moire to happen. And because it's floating off the wall, now you can play around with light and shadow behind the piece.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Giving those open areas dimension.
Yeah. Is there any particular reason why you kept the box beam frames on some of them and not others?
They were always intended to stay in that frame, where this, from its conception, was intended to come out of the frame.
Right.
With any of my work, generally speaking, 1 out of 3 are keepers and 2 out of 3 aren't. So many of those that are intended to stay in there, for whatever reason, it just doesn't work.
The broader issue, which, I was speaking as an art historian, and I hate to do that.
Well, I'll speak as an artist, which
also, most of them are so boring, and an academic. But I'm not an academic. I might be lots of things, but I'm not an academic. That's one saving grace. But looking at it from an art historical viewpoint, what I've noticed in the last maybe decade or even more, and this is a broad issue, is in totally different types of artists who have not even knowledge or relationship to each other, a new kind of spatiality, which, if you take a long perspective, you've got Renaissance space, which, as the art historian John Golding, my teacher, who's having, by the way, he's got a show next door, the Arts Club. You might want to take a look in sometime. It's on the first floor. But a point he made when he wrote his book on Cubism, his canonical book, it's still the best book, is that a Renoir, pre-Cubist, is closer to a Raphael than it is to anything afterwards. And Cubism marked a completely new kind of space. That was the first big break, around, say, 1910-12. Then it's quite obvious that the kind of pictorial space that artists as different as Rothko, Pollock, Newman created was another kind of landmark. Because, a Pollock or Rothko doesn't look like a Cubist, Picasso or Braque.
Sure.
And they knew that themselves, And when I did the RA show, and a lot of people didn't realize it, but there was a quote at the very entrance where Clifford Still says, "The thing is, Pollock, Rothko, de Kooning and I, we change the nature of painting." And then they did, because there's a before and after Abex, I call it BAAX, if you know what I mean, sort of like that. But what I'm coming to is that I think maybe pretty much about the same time as the cyberspatial age developed. That's within you're probably not old enough to know a day when we had a typewriter and a phone, and that was it.
I used to have a phone connected to the wall with a cord. Mom got a longer cord, it was a big deal.
But, around about that time, we've seen in so many different artists a new kind of space. And you don't know whether you're looking at things very close up or very far away or both. And I get the feeling, I look at this and they're marbled patternings. And then the verticals seem to belong to a wholly different order, both expressively and spatially. But to me, and then I saw, to just mentioned a few other shows in town, like Timothy Taylor. Sure. Dingyi has got a show, a Chinese artist, and we just had a quick look at Garth Weiser, at Simon Lee, and there's you, and there's no connection, except that all the art belongs to a kind of space which is very hard to grapple with. I mean, it's intriguing because they're very layered. The silk screen verticals, if you look closely, because of an interference effect, it's called Doppler interference, I don't know, it's an interference effect anyway, creates moire patterns.
Yeah.
But then you also have a kind of moire patterns within the paintings themselves, within these areas. And you look at them together and there's this, it's not a conflict, but it's a dialogue between chaos and placement. And the artist who comes to mind, obviously, although I don't think he means as much to you as, say, Pollock or Rothko, is Newman. Because Newman's verticals, he himself said that they were like placeholders,
right?
And they organized the potential chaos of the field of color. And I'm seeing, I mean, these are nothing like Barnett Newman except for the verticals. But I'm seeing this same kind of play between color, which is inherently inchoate, formless, and the vinyl, or where the vinyl isn't, which actually gives a kind of, it's almost a grid-like structure. And it's a very tantalizing combination of different types of space. And it's made especially so when, as in the painting in space in the area behind us, you've got the cutouts on the walls. The circles are actually behind.
On the wall, yeah.
Yeah. And then how conscious is this effort to create, it's not a dizzying space, but it's
to play
slightly psychedelic. And not in a sort of dated sense of the 60s.
Sure.
But psychedelic in that kind of mind-blowing thing.
I love the idea, like with the piece around the corner, that interference pattern, it really messes with light. And it's sort of unpredictable. And if you move up and down, it does something different than if you move side to side. It doesn't feel like lenticular, where it's predictable side to side. It's always the same story. This somehow feels new. It feels like you look in a different place and it's a different experience. And I really like this idea that perception of where is it? Where does something exist in space and time? Where do we exist in space and time?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because at the root of most art, and especially abstract art, as I see it, is both space and time. And Rothko's paintings, they take effect quite slowly. And that's what he wanted, and they change with the light. But if you think of some, and the same applies to Ad Reinhardt's late, very black paintings.
Sure.
And I looked at the one, several in the RA show, and they it's slow looking. You can't look at them fast.
Right.
You won't see them.
You have to, right.
It's only when you see they're all made of different colors, and there's 9 rectangles where you thought it was just a blacked out field. And those kind of artists, they create slow looking. But then you get an artist like de Kooning and Newman, who seem much more interested in a kind of very fast instantaneity, and I think this is how I read it, you're kind of straddling both.
There's a lot going on in this body of work in the 9 months that this work was made in. I've been discovering new thing after new thing after new thing, and my sort of feeling is, okay, here I have something. What can I take this? What can I make it? And how can I raise the bar? Okay, this is an interesting effect. but how can I make it not just speak, but how can I make it sing? And what needs to happen to make that sing? And would it be interesting next to this or next to that? And again, failure all the time, but little bits of success leading me to, oh, this is wow.
Taking up that idea, how long, I mean, obviously the bigger paintings take longer to make than the small ones. Well, that shouldn't necessarily be the case.
No.
Some ways a small painting can take longer than a bigger one, because someone like Kazuo Shiraga, the Gutai guy, those big paintings are done very quickly. Like I say, take a small Vermeer, they're done very slowly. But how long on average does it take you to make a painting?
Give or take 1 to 2 weeks.
Not bad.
Max.
Not bad.
And the most complicated pieces in the show is like the one in the stairway with the blue bands, the riff upon Frank Stella, because it's different elements, and elements have to dry, and that's as this work goes, that work is the most contrived, for good or for bad.
How long do they take to dry?
So they're acrylic, they're thick, and it depends upon what. So the green band that went on, that was dry, and I could have worked behind it in 4 hours. I chose to let it dry overnight. Everything that happened within this painting was a wet-on-wet session, and I would guess to say that was 2 hours.
And with paintings like this, if I call it patterning, then that's not meant to be derogatory. It's just
sure. So
the morphology.
This piece was made over a longer period of time. So this is a 2-week painting. This was a lot of little small areas of paint being put down, moved with a squeegee, allowed to dry. Other little small areas allowed to dry. The bands were on the entire time of the painting, the creation of the painting. But the last thing to happen in any of these paintings that have raised areas, that was always last. And when that happened, it happened over the entire area of the painting at once. And that's a real, grab your hat. You got to make it happen, because I'm fighting drying time. And when you have a big area like that that's open, where you have all that wet paint, it's wanting to congeal and crud, so it has to be done quickly. And I'm in that part of these paintings, I'm underneath 5 times in a minute. Seeing how much I'm pushing through, because you can go too far and you change the feeling of a piece, and you go much too far, it falls off. Gravity.
There's very fascinating kind of balance or equipoise between, and again, I don't use this in a bad sense, the decorative.
Sure, everything is decorative.
And something which is almost slightly, kind of hits you. The color.
Right.
The color's very strong, and it over there, okay, that's very restrained, but you come here, and this lime green, it's, no wonder it's hanging there, because anyone outside is going to instantly be, thrown by that lime green. Where's the color come from in your genealogy, as it were?
It's all kinds of places. It's what I have found that, that I love through time more often than not. It's something I see. It's picking up a Vogue magazine. It's looking at a sunset. It's going through Instagram, which I'm only partially fully addicted to, not completely.
I haven't got onto it yet.
Oh, it's so great. You can just zing through, and you can see, 100 different paintings in a minute or 10 minutes, however fast you want to go through it. And that's where the pieces that are a riff upon Frank Stella. I saw a Frank Stella piece that somebody had posted. I was like, wow. And actually went past it, and then I reeled it back, and then I did a screenshot. And about 3 weeks later, I was making those paintings.
So you map them out on a Mac?
Yeah. So.
But to what extent?
So all of these, with the exception of the ones that are just complete biomorphic abstraction where there's no line or square or circle.
Yeah.
So on Adobe Illustrator, in basically black and white, or I'll use a color, I'm looking at where forms are and how will they work within that space.
But you don't do any digital painting? Because
No.
I have a friend
No.
in New York who sort of like paints with a phone almost.
No.
Okay, no, I'm with you.
No.
Just on a Mac,
Yeah.
take this.
Mm-hmm.
This wouldn't appear as your template.
No, that was what it had on the Mac. Was it had a green band
It's a
and
geometric
a
area.
pink rectangle, and the rest of it was white. And I was like, I like the tension between these forms, and let's go, let's try. And you don't really know until it stood up. You have all these different things, but I might stand it up and go, shit, I wish the green band had been 4 inches farther left because there would have been more tension. It would have worked better for this, that, or the other reason. Or because this certain element ended up here, had it ended up there, it might have not worked. I mean, all kinds of my 1 out of 3 success ratio of the 2 out of 3 that don't work, 90% of those don't work because of compositional elements that I don't like.
Well, and you destroy them? You don't rework?
So either I look for a section to cut out or multiple sections to cut out, and that often happens, or I chuck the whole thing.
Right, got it. In these areas, although, as you said, somewhere in the background there's Pollock and the notion of action painting. With my wretched art historical mind, I instantly start making connections to the past.
Sure.
And what does spring to mind somewhere in the ancestry? Two things which are actually very closely related. Marbling, which is, marbling's a great art. It's an applied art, but the history of marbling in books has got a long history, And the thing about marbling is it's a mixture of accident and very careful control because colors puddle. And, it's really quite a high craft. But the other counterpart to that, and it's one of my obsessions, imitation stone. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, you see it in many places, but the place where it's never been done better is in the Jesuitenkirche in Vienna, Jesuit church in Vienna.
Okay.
And I always remember because it's some late 17th century, and you go into it, and you think you're in this amazingly place decorated with stones and marbles, granites, and all that. And the columns, they look like as if they're granite columns, and they're totally marbled. And the actual art of that marbling is much more sophisticated even than marbling on paper. But you go up to it, and it's not so different. I went up and tapped it.
Yeah.
Look, it sounds hollow, but it's a kind of sense of illusion that you're looking at this extraordinary efflorescence of decoration and ornament, but kept within the architectural panels and things like that, the rectangular or the columns, And I'm sure you're not influenced by that, but...
No, but it is, first of all, I have no problem with the idea of something being decorative or
Nothing
decoration.
wrong with that at all.
Everything is decoration. I don't care if it's Anselm Kiefer or it's all decoration.
Absolutely.
But if something appears to be marbling, or it appears to be schmear, or it appears to be this, that, or the other, I don't care. For me, is it working? Is the language that's evolving, is that fascinating? And how is that language, how is this language working, being contrasted by these other forms?
Right.
And is that edgy? Is it making you, is it harmony? Is it pushing? Is it pulling? But again, I don't set out to make a certain something. I do something, and I find out, oh, if I do this, this, and this, that happens. And again, all right, if I like that outcome, how do I control it? What can I do with it? Where can I take it? How can I expand upon it?
This is a really tough one because I don't really expect an answer. But I might as well say it. Are your paintings emotional?
For me, making them or after the fact?
Say it again?
Making them or after the effect?
Both.
After, when it's finished?
Both.
I certainly don't think of the process as emotional while I'm making the work. It's full concentration. You know, it's all in. And I don't take for granted the idea of this moment of stepping up to the plate, like, you know, you're going to hit a ball.
Yeah.
Well, I'm stepping up to the plate to do this, and there's a lot on the line. Not just on a monetary side of what my studio costs and my assistants and the paint and the this and the that and the whatever. I want this painting, I want whatever I'm about to get into to be the best painting I've ever made in my life. That's the criteria, that's the bar that I set. I fail all the time, but occasionally.
Yeah, I know lots of abstract artists feel that way, and I remember Frank Stella saying almost the same thing to me.
What do you think?
You know, I find it impossible to look at any art, even abstract art, this is why I asked the question, without saying to myself, well, is it just like a language that you hear? Or is it a language which has a content and sets up various kind of emotional responses in you? And this is not a question, but what's intriguing about this kind of work is, and I say this in full transparency, I don't quite know what to make of it. I mean, it speaks to me,
right?
But it's speaking to me in a way that I can't redact it. It's not like, you know, you can look at a Mondrian,
right?
And maybe when he painted those works in the 20s and all that, I mean, they must have been shocking to a lot of people.
Sure.
But when we look back now, and they're like kind of Swiss clocks, you know,
yeah.
That's kind of universal order. There's something deliberately unresolved. The color, the contrast between the amorphous, swirling patterns and the very finely wrought verticals. I mean, what's interesting is how you handle scale, because the scale of that work is fairly bold, but there it's very fine-tuned to a whole different register, which is very delicate. And to be able to move from that to that is to me quite a sign of virtuosity.
Oh, well,
because you don't strike me as, I know you love Rothko, and yeah, I did. Well, I still do, but up to 600.
Right.
But painters like Rothko, you know, they're one-image type painters.
Right.
He said that himself. He said if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing over and over again until the public really get it. You don't strike me, and I don't know a lot of the back history of your art. I mean, works from 2014, 15. But you strike me very interestingly as someone who is not going to stay in a signature style. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I mean, it's like Newman got his signature style, and all Newmans are different, but they all look alike. But I don't get the feeling that all Casselmans look alike in that sense.
And I hope the case is, whether it's a year from today or 10 years from today, that the work not only looks different, but it's grown. Right. It's become something else. Something that rings in my head every single day is innovate or die.
Very good.
And it's the simple notion that good is not good, great is not good, stunning is the only thing that's acceptable.
Well, they're pretty stunning.
Well, thank you.
They are
But
pretty- they are pretty stunning.
that's the only way forward to create things that are truly compelling and hopefully will be moving to other people. It's not just about what goes with the sofa. You know, I hope this matches the sofa, the home that it goes into, but or maybe not. You know, but that it's, however, whatever the words are, larger than life. That it's something that it's like, you know.
Yeah.
That's the experience I had in front of Pollock's 131.
I can't see it from here. Is this a square?
Yes.
That's a square I can see.
Yes.
Is there any particular reason for the square?
Funny, I did not paint a square painting until probably 20 years after graduating from college. I thought the square was a cop-out.
Was a
Cop-out. Like, it's too
Right.
easy. So I always painted in rectangles.
So you didn't fall under a spell of Joseph Albers.
I don't know what Kool-Aid I was drinking. You know, it changes. It always changes color
that's
and
funny
form.
because I spent like 30 years thinking that Albers was possibly one of the three most boring artists of the 20th century.
Well,
And then suddenly, I saw Albers in, of all places, in the Morandi Museum in Bologna. They had a show of Albers Morandi. And suddenly I came round to Albers, and then I think he's absolutely... I could see 600 and think they're still pretty gripping.
It's funny how sometimes, when the student's ready, the teacher appears.
Yeah.
And sometimes something makes sense eventually.
No, absolutely.
But
absolutely.
anyways, I've come to the square, and now I sort of adore the square, and I like to play upon the tension of four equal sides and how I can mess with that.
Do you feel that, I'm thinking in terms of the box frames, and also the inscribed rectangles like a pink one here, do you feel the paintings are contained within their frame, or rather, as Jackson Pollock said, no limits, just edges. He famously said that, the sense was going on beyond it.
I think I'm too much of a what's real is real. This blue jean is a blue jean, and the floor is a floor, and the floor is stopping me from falling through to the next thing. So, to me, where the painting ends, it ends. If this were to be in an installation where it was the entire space, and I have ideas about doing things related to this work that would be installation, that would be, corner, edge to edge with different, lighting and things, then so be it. But these paintings, where it ends, it ends.
Right. Do you ever feel an urge, and I'm not sure how big your paintings have been in the past, but do you ever feel an urge to get bigger?
Oh, absolutely. And
do,
there's pieces in my studio related to this.
Yeah.
There's one almost 10 feet square, and I'm about to order a device like this that will allow me to work with... I won't likely be able to keep it in the device because it'll be so large, but I could have a piece like this, which, could fold to get moved or whatever, that could be 10 by 18 feet.
That's pretty epic.
So that's something you can enter.
Yeah, no, it's pretty epic. Don't laugh.
Yeah.
The epic's important. No, it is. I mean, but the issue with painting coming out of ABEX, abstract expressionism, is touch versus scale. Mm-hmm. Because Rothko couldn't. No, I'm not using Rothko as a whipping boy, but he couldn't really function on a very big scale. He got laborious. Mm-hmm. And when he came to do the murals, the Seagrams, the Harvards, and the chapel,
I agree with that.
He overstretched himself in a way. And although people see, the Seagrams as very great, I mean, they're very effective as a kind of sort of haunted stage, abstract stage scenery, almost like that. But Rothko was a very touchy-feely painter, and he painted big, relatively big, but not huge paintings with small brushes on the whole.
Right.
And I wonder if you worked. Pollock's interesting because one of the things about Pollock is again, I tried to show in the Abex show at the RA, he could paint very small and very big.
And it was the same line.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And in relationship to your painting, say 10 by 18, would your sense of touch be the same?
So it's a question mark, and I won't know until I do it. And it may succeed and it may fail. You know, sometimes you make a piece that's this big and you think, wow, it's going to be incredible if I expand it to something like this. And you expand and you're like, doesn't work. And vice versa. So there's no way to know. And the way I work is I have an idea, I put it together, and I do it. And if it's fabulous, so be it. And if it's not, okay, well, maybe I need to readjust or maybe abandon entirely.
And you don't know beforehand where it's going to work out.
No.
No, that's very de Kooning sort of gesturalist, action taking kind of thing. Yeah.
You know, next. It's part of the reason too. Just quickly though, I typically have 3 to 5, sometimes more paintings going on at any one given time, and for the simple reason that when one fails, I can get over it quickly. Because I've got other things I'm excited about. So I'm not going to cry over the spilled milk of how many hours and dollars went into X, Y, or Z. You know, F it next.
Yeah, I don't think that's quite unusual because I went to Berlin for gallery weekend and I visited an artist whom I know there who's incredibly influenced by Pollock, but working in a renovated factory space.
Okay.
But then in one of the big spaces, you know, he's got like 8 or 10 canvases put out to dry. Almost like, you know, putting things out in the sun to dry, almost. But the point of the story is that even in his case, I don't think he knew until things were dry and he had a good look at the different canvases, which ones worked and which ones didn't. So it's, you know, it's like making an extra batch, or well, this is a bad comparison, but it's like baking cakes. You know, if you're baking a whole load of muffins or something like that, some are going to work and some flop or something like that. Yeah, and I can see that. I can see the whole point. So you've got no sense of where you're going to go from here. You're going to stay in. So
I have a sense, and one thing I know about myself is that my sense today at this moment may not be my sense 10 minutes from now or tomorrow morning, but generally speaking, all of the work in this show is new, and I intend to push everything that you see further, and sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in dramatic ways. I'm also interested in incorporating light into this work when there are pieces that are suspended off the wall where I could incorporate light behind the piece to create an ambiance coming through it or around it.
And this quality of light, from what I saw some of your earlier work, there was actual light.
Yeah, so I worked
through, like almost like stained glass.
That's exactly, my early practice was studying abroad here in London, 1983, sitting in Westminster Abbey, looking at the windows, and it hit me. I want to make paintings that have light shining through color as opposed to light reflecting off of color.
Yes, although the paintings are quite reflective, and that part of their complexity is that, on the one hand, like a line behind me, I mean, that's very reflective. But in other cases, especially the one in the back there where you've got the cutout ovoids, ovals, you know, behind it, the whole lot, they're not op paintings, you know, they're not sort of paintings that make you feel dizzy or, you have to take a travel sickness tablet, something like that. But they're very optical, but not in the tricksy sense. And the way in which, there's this sense of space and of radiance, and also the color has its own light. Because, those purples and that one there, it's a very, it's a silken feel.
That one plays upon Impressionism. When you get right up into it, you see very defined yellow lines and a purple, white, gray background. And the farther you move away, colors from the opposite side of the color wheel start merging, and that's why you end up at a sort of a greeny, whatever that you see now.
So is there any connection, no matter how remote, between that and, say, the function of lead moldings within stained glass? Because they hold it in, if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
and also
they
the
create
stone around it.
Right. And and who knows, how things, again, in this full circle of what influenced me and how it might still be, and I'm not even consciously aware, but it's playing a role.
Probably last thought or last question or last orders. And this is a loaded word, and I hate to bring it up, but it still keeps coming back in discussions of art, even in this sort of, we call it postmodern, whatever we call this.
Okay.
Terrible time we're in, and spirituality. Because the reason I bring it up is because you talk about stained glass, and obviously, that's about nothing if not spirituality. And in that famous book by Panofsky, he talks about Chartres and Saint-Denis, and the whole idea that light shining through things is itself a spiritual thing, because that light has to come from somewhere beyond, even if it's just on the other side of stained glass.
Right.
You're seeing something impalpable, made palpable. What's your take on spirituality?
So I guess my take is that, again, going back to the experience when I was in front of Pollock's 131, and how color, light, and form took me on a journey. And I have wanted to have my own work have that sort of nature, have that character, and calling it spiritual, calling it this, that, or the other. I don't know what the terms are, but the idea that consciousness can be affected and changed. That for the moments one is in front of a given piece of art, that one is in a different place. And however much that may or may not influence one's life, crazy to say that it changes one's life, but can affect one's life. I mean, Pollock's 131 set me on a course that is the reason I'm sitting right here.
Yeah, and absolutely, because at the end of the day, and I heard Clement Greenberg talk here, 1974. Art's got to give you something you can't get from somewhere else. Otherwise, there's no point. And whatever I get from these works, I can't get it from somewhere else. They're very beautiful.
Thank you.
They're very tantalizing, and their complexity, because they are complex. I mean, you've explained how they're done. Makes you want to come back to them. Simple as that.
Oh, thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
That's touching.
Pretty good, Stanley. And the other thing is, I'm not going to name names, but you go into galleries now, and some of the stuff you see is so god-awful. And I go out thinking, oh, God, like that. And, there's period styles, and I'm particularly thinking of those painters who paint in what I call the washed-out figurative style. I've got names in my head, but I better be careful what I say. I don't want to depreciate the stock of any Uber gallery. But it's not like this, you know. They've got balls.
Well,
But they're also very delicate. Very nice fine balance between the decorative as something that exalts in itself, you know. Because you remember when I came here before and I said, well, the thing you've got to look at is that carpet shop on the corner. It's on the next corner, and it's just full of those stunning Islamic Persian carpets. And you don't ask what they mean. What they are is what they mean. You know, they exalt in themselves. And on the decorative side of your art, it does that. It doesn't mean anything, but it gives you something.
Well, David, just quickly, because this is the end of this conversation, and this can be edited out. Yeah. Literally, in my mind, as I start each painting, I say, it needs to have "fuck you."
Well, that's wonderful, yeah.
It needs to have "fuck," and "fuck you" can be subtle, and "fuck you" can be loud as hell. But it needs to have "fuck you." No middle of the road.
Well, you've got something in common, because when I wake up every morning, I say the same thing.
Thinks about me and says, "Fuck you." David.
Thank you, Stanley.
Brilliant. Any questions?
I won't hear things properly. You better ask him. Yeah.
Hello. Thanks for this wonderful talk. It's very rare I actually enjoy a talk between a curator and artist. Thank you. My question has to do with your works on silk screen, which I absolutely adore, by the way.
Thank you.
I was just wondering whether there is a subconscious resemblance with, you know, computer screens and digital reality and your fascination with Instagram, maybe? Is there a connection?
You know, I can't say there's a conscious connection, but I am constantly gathering and consuming and storing from my experience in life, from all of it, from whether it's a taxi ride or going into the refrigerator, everything is a possible input into my work. Every experience, anything. Sitting in an art class, in an art history class in 1982 or whenever, learning about Renaissance art, I couldn't sit there and help but daydream and think, you know what? I don't want to be limited to X, Y, and Z. I want the possibility that anything could be an input into my work. The moon, the stars, the ground, the this, the that. The only limitations in life are this. And that's something else that I try and challenge myself with, which is into that innovate or die, is to get outside of my own box. Because this is my limitation. So how can I get outside of it? I challenge myself to think 10 paintings ahead, to think a year ahead, and then jump back to today with the sort of overriding feeling of, okay, this is done, and I'm loving it right now, but what am I going to think in a year? What am I going to think in 10 years? Will it stand the test of time? I know that was a train off the tracks to your question.
No, test of time is good, I think. Yeah.
I actually have a supplementary. to that, which I've been thinking about throughout, and it's to do with. By the way, I love the work. I haven't seen it in person before, so this is nice.
Thank you.
I'm going to get right up to it in a minute, but something you were saying about the chance and failure, and you talked a bit about Pollock and talked about all of that. What I'm interested in is whether you see the more formal elements, the industrial elements, the computer-generated, the straight line, as it were, as some way of kind of restraining or holding back that kind of, that loose element. Is there something in there?
Yes, you hit spot on, and it's, for me, the green band and the pink rectangle, they provide contrast to this biomorphic abstraction. Just biomorphic abstraction, it can be beautiful, but when contrasted with something, it says that the biomorphic abstraction is more interesting and more beautiful, and that the pink line is interesting and beautiful. One imbues the other. That contrast tells you. It's like if you paint a room the most gorgeous shade of red, but the whole room, pretty rapidly that becomes boring. It becomes, a sea of, whatever it is. You need something to contrast something in order to make you realize it and appreciate it. And that's what I'm thinking about in these pieces. It's really a formal sense of what can I do to set off this biomorphic abstraction, to make it special, and to make you want more.
Well, what you do is you give it a backbone, because otherwise you end up with a jellyfish.
Yes.
No, I'm serious. The geometric elements are the backbone. I mean, and they set up a tension and dialectic.
Yeah, I mean, inherently, because it's in a square or a rectangle, that's already form, but it's not enough. Would the paintings be interesting, just biomorphic abstraction? Sure. There's a few upstairs from the beginning of the series. There's a white one and a blue one that were the first few before there was any other element. But I realized with those, it needs something in order to tell you how fabulous this is.
Yeah.
You're obviously working with the front and the reverse side of the image.
Yes.
In the process. And you've also created some work here, for example, where you kind of move away from the wall a bit, and they kind of tempt you to peep behind and see what's going on there. And I guess that's perhaps intended to a certain extent as well.
Absolutely.
Do you have any plans to perhaps move completely away from the wall, have a work with a non-conventional front and reverse side of the painting in the future?
You're a very insightful human being, because there should have been a piece hanging within this space, two-sided, different from either side, but one that if you're on this side of it and somebody walks by the other, you would see somebody walking by the other. So I made this piece. It was the last piece that would have been in the show, and unfortunately, once I got it up and hung, and even went to the point of having my photographer come and shoot it, I was like, it's just not right. It's not good enough. And that's why it's not here. But so yes, that is something I intend to explore, because it's fascinating. Because it's interactive. And again, as somebody moves or something is moving, it's like, what's that? But it's in focus, out of focus. So that's something I'm going to push.
There's something I've noticed, the flatter the painting, the more the illusion of depth. Because you see, I call this, just to coin it, these are your relief fields.
Yes.
And these are your very sort of finessed, ultra-flat fields. And because they're physical reliefs, with, areas of recessed, areas to stand proud, you look at them much more physically as a flat surface than you do this, where there is no relief at all, but there is an extraordinary illusion, which is almost like morphing in the cinema, of roiling depths. And it's very paradoxical.
And again, it's, this work started out, and I started discovering these little sort of branches and offsets, and I started pushing really in 3 different directions all at once, which I really enjoy, because it keeps all of the others fresh. It's very easy, because I work in a rather ferocious fashion, it's very easy for me to get bored. I don't like to do the same thing again. I have to raise the bar. It's got to get better. It's got to get more compelling on some level, or it dead ends. So by working in several different directions at once, it keeps each of those fresh in a way, or fresher. I think I almost get better results little challenging to keep certain things straight in my head at times, but you know.
Yeah, because more than with figurative art, the challenge of abstraction is getting stuck in a rut. And this takes us back almost to where we began, you know, with the one image artists, Pollock less so than some.
Right.
You don't want abstraction to become your straitjacket.
It's funny, I was having a conversation with Michael sitting in the back about Rothko and wondering about his depression. And I suspect that the reviews got tougher and tougher through his life.
You know, people argue that one of the issues was that he painted himself into a dead end.
Well, and that's what I was saying.
And you know, there were plenty of other factors.
Sure.
But that is an element.
Yeah.
And I think you have to, if I think myself into the mind of an abstract artist, for me the greatest fear would be becoming fossilized and just, you know, variations on a theme.
Mm-hmm.
With you know, great artists like Mondrian, then he manages to wring a certain kind of eloquence and variety out of a continually, well, not static, but a template which is always there.
Right.
And I think, as I read it, you know, your working methods, working from the back and not being sure of quite how things are going to come out, it's, you know, it's a hostage against boredom and monotonousness. That's how I see it, even if it's not absolutely intentional. But it's, you know, you're taking a hostage against formulaic.
And it's interesting because it allows for things through random occurrence to happen that I could not have figured out on my own or would never have created. And listen, train wrecks occur, but the stuff that's stunning, it's like, whew, thank you. You know, yes, I'm the one that put A, B, and C together and moved it in a certain way, and ultimately, I guess, yes, I created it, but it's, you know, it's the random thing, and it's like the random nature of life, and this, that, and the other. And so I embrace, you know, the unknown.
This is the figure of life itself, and I use figure in the sense of not a figure, but metaphor, what you call a trope. It's a mix of randomness and I'm convinced of some kind of plan or pattern.
Well, maybe those two brain cells occasionally meet up there, you know, and figure out a cohesive thought.
Yes, because I saw something on the web yesterday, I can't remember where I saw it. That's quite interesting because, you know, you think of this world of cyberspace and the web, and increasingly you don't know where you've seen something. It's very, you know, it's like hypertext, you know, was it in that page or that page? But basically what it was saying was, do we have an inbuilt hardwiring? This maybe is a good time to stop on this. Do we have an inbuilt hardwiring towards figuration? Because you go back to Lasso, Altamira, and all that onwards, it looks like abstraction is a sort of wild card within our DNA.
I mean, it makes sense that people want to paint figures because we're people.
Exactly.
And people want to see people, I guess.
But that itself makes sense of wanting to paint the opposite.
Yeah, me, I'm not interested at all.
Something you haven't got.
I want non-objective. I want, you know, it's me and my fantasy as a kid when I wanted to fly up to the sphere where all of the stars existed. That's what I thought, and then I thought I could crack through that shell, and then I don't know what would be next, but I would just keep going. It's the unknown. I'm interested in the unknown and how that can imbue consciousness.
I sense that you're what I call, it takes one to know one, a control freak artist at heart.
So it's both, you know, I'm letting it go nuts, but yes, I do want to control. A bit of you is what
I once joked in an essay that all art can fall into two categories with a huge spectrum between them. There's control freak artists, the Mondrians, the Chardins, Raphaels, and there's the potentially messy artists, You know, the de Koonings, in a way, the Titians are painterly artists, you know, the way that they let the way paint goes. And I think you've got a bit of both in your DNA.
I'm completely scrambled eggs of who knows what.
Just the vibes I get. I think we have to call it a day now. Any more burning questions are going to change the world? Or no. Well, thank you, Stanley.
Thank you,
for a very
David.
nice
This
show. I haven't
really...
met you before, but I'm going to meet you again.